September 14th, 1966. A U.S. infantry platoon walks straight toward a Viet Cong ambush. 400 meters away, an Australian SAS operator watches through binoculars. He doesn't see them first. He smells them. Old Spice aftershave, Ivory soap, Marlboro cigarettes. He radios the American commander, stops the patrol, saves 37 lives. The Americans ask how Charlie knew they were coming. The Australian answers, "Mate, I could smell you from a kilometer away." So could they. The Vietnam War presented American military forces with a tactical environment fundamentally different from conventional warfare doctrines developed during World War II in Korea. Unlike previous conflicts with defined front lines and rear areas, Vietnam's jungle terrain created a three-dimensional battle space where the enemy possessed intimate environmental knowledge accumulated over decades of continuous warfare. Among the many tactical adaptations required for effective counterinsurgency operations, one of the most overlooked, yet significant, was olfactory discipline, commonly termed smell discipline, by Australian and British Commonwealth forces operating in Southeast Asia. American military doctrine in 1965 emphasized maintaining standardized hygiene protocols across all operational environments. Field Manual 21-10, published in 1959 and still in effect during early Vietnam deployments, specified that soldiers maintain daily personal hygiene routines, including shaving, bathing, and use of appropriate toiletry products. This doctrine reflected deeply embedded institutional values linking personal appearance standards to unit discipline and combat effectiveness. The underlying assumption held that maintaining garrison standards in field environments preserved morale, prevented disease, and reinforced military professionalism. This doctrinal approach manifested in comprehensive logistical support for personal hygiene products. Post-exchange facilities throughout South Vietnam stocked commercial American toiletries, Old Spice and Aqua Velva aftershaves, Right Guard and Band deodorants, Ivory and Dial soaps, Colgate and Crest toothpastes, Gillette and Schick razors. Monthly supply requisitions for infantry battalions routinely included these items alongside ammunition and rations. The quantities were substantial. A typical infantry company of 150 men received approximately 300 bars of soap, 200 cans of shaving cream, and 150 bottles of aftershave per month through standard supply channels. The cultural importance of these standards cannot be overstated. American military traditions since the 19th century connected personal grooming to professional military identity. Regulations specified appearance standards in minute detail. Army Regulation 600-20, governing personal appearance and grooming, required soldiers to be clean-shaven, except when field conditions absolutely prevented it, with field conditions narrowly defined. Company commanders faced pressure from battalion leadership to maintain appearance standards, even during extended operations. Inspections in rear areas evaluated units partly on soldiers' grooming. This created institutional momentum toward maintaining hygiene routines, regardless of tactical environment. In contrast, Australian Special Air Service doctrine evolved from fundamentally different historical experience. British SAS operations during the Malayan Emergency from 1948 to 1960 established jungle warfare principles through 12 years of continuous counterinsurgency against communist forces operating from deep jungle bases. The Malayan environment presented similar challenges to Vietnam: dense triple canopy jungle, high humidity, an enemy with superior environmental knowledge, and operations requiring small patrols to operate independently for extended periods without resupply. British and Australian forces discovered through operational experience that maintaining Western hygiene standards compromised tactical effectiveness in jungle environments. The discovery emerged gradually through pattern analysis of failed operations. Patrols maintaining standard hygiene practices experienced higher rates of enemy contact initiated by opposing forces, suggesting adversary early warning capabilities. Meanwhile, patrols that had exhausted hygiene supplies and operated dirty for extended periods reported approaching enemy positions more closely before detection. Systematic analysis identified olfactory detection as a significant factor. Communist guerrillas in Malaya, many of whom had lived in jungle environments for years, demonstrated enhanced olfactory sensitivity compared to urban-raised Western soldiers. They could detect and identify foreign chemical scents at ranges Western forces initially considered implausible. British SAS began experimenting with smell discipline protocols around 1954, progressively eliminating scented products from operational loadouts. The results were measurable. SAS squadrons implementing smell discipline protocols reported a 43% reduction in enemy-initiated contact during reconnaissance operations compared to baseline periods. More significantly, successful close approaches to enemy positions, defined as achieving observation positions within 100 meters without detection, increased by 67%. These statistical improvements drove doctrinal adoption. By 1957, smell discipline was formalized in British SAS jungle warfare doctrine and incorporated into selection and training programs. Australian SAS inherited this doctrine when the regiment formed in 1957. Australian involvement in the Malayan Emergency's final years and subsequent operations during the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation from 1963 to 1966 provided continuous operational validation. When Australian forces deployed to Vietnam in 1965, they brought 2 decades of institutional knowledge about jungle counterinsurgency, with smell discipline as a core tactical principle. The scientific basis for smell discipline rests on atmospheric physics and human olfactory biology. Volatile organic compounds, the molecular basis of scent, disperse through air via diffusion and convection. Dispersion rates vary with temperature, humidity, and air movement. Tropical jungle environments present optimal conditions for scent transmission. High humidity, typically 85 to 95% in Vietnamese jungle, increases the persistence of volatile compounds in air. Water molecules bond with organic compounds, slowing their breakdown and extending detection ranges. Temperature also affects scent dispersion. Vietnamese jungle temperatures typically ranged from 28 to 35 degrees Celsius during operational periods. At these temperatures, volatile compounds evaporate readily from surfaces, including human skin and fabric. Simultaneously, dense jungle canopy creates temperature inversions, where cooler air near ground level traps scent molecules below the canopy, where human olfactory detection occurs. Air movement in jungle environments follows complex patterns. While canopy-level winds may reach 15 to 20 kilometers per hour, ground-level air movement typically measures 2 to 5 kilometers per hour and follows terrain contours. This channeling effect concentrates scents along valleys and trails, where military movement naturally occurs. Under these conditions, strong scent sources can be detected at ranges between 500 and 2,000 meters, depending on specific environmental factors and observer olfactory sensitivity. Human olfactory capability varies significantly based on environmental conditioning. Urban populations in industrialized nations experience constant exposure to thousands of synthetic scents, creating a high baseline that reduces sensitivity to individual scent sources. This phenomenon, termed olfactory fatigue, means Western soldiers raised in cities possess reduced scent discrimination compared to populations living in environments with limited synthetic chemical exposure. Vietnamese rural populations, and particularly Viet Cong fighters living continuously in jungle environments, maintained olfactory sensitivity comparable to pre-industrial human baseline. Research on hunter-gatherer populations suggests humans possess olfactory capabilities far exceeding typical Western baselines when not suppressed by constant synthetic scent exposure. Viet Cong fighters could detect and identify specific scents at ranges Western soldiers found implausible because their olfactory systems operated near biological maximum capacity rather than the reduced capacity typical of Western urban populations. The chemical signatures of American toiletry products were particularly detectable. Aftershaves contained synthetic fragrance compounds designed for maximum dispersal and persistence. Old Spice, the most common brand among American forces, contained cinnamaldehyde, limonene, and eugenol, compounds selected specifically for strong scent profiles and long persistence. These chemicals do not occur naturally in Vietnamese jungle flora, making them immediately identifiable as foreign. Detection ranges for aftershave under optimal conditions could reach 2 kilometers. Soap presented similar issues. Ivory soap, widely distributed through military supply channels, contained sodium talawate, sodium cocoate, and synthetic fragrances designed to leave residual scent on skin after washing. This residual scent persisted for 24 to 48 hours after use, continuously marking the user as foreign. Deodorants were even more problematic. Products like Right Guard contained aluminum compounds and synthetic musks designed to suppress body odor and provide fragrance for 12 to 24 hours. In jungle humidity, these compounds volatilized continuously, creating persistent scent signatures detectable at 500 to 800 meters. Tobacco smoke from American cigarettes possessed distinct chemical signatures different from Vietnamese tobacco. American cigarettes contained additives including cocoa, licorice, sugars, and ammonia compounds used to enhance flavor and nicotine delivery. These additives created combustion byproducts chemically distinct from pure tobacco smoke. Viet Cong fighters familiar with local tobacco could identify American cigarette smoke as foreign based on these chemical differences. Detection ranges for cigarette smoke reached 800 to 1,000 meters under favorable conditions. Even laundry practices created detectable signatures. American military laundry facilities used commercial detergents containing synthetic fragrances and optical brighteners. These chemicals absorbed into fabric and released slowly over time. Freshly laundered uniforms carried detectable scent signatures for 3 to 5 days. The white t-shirts commonly worn under jungle uniforms were particularly problematic, having been washed in strong detergents and carrying concentrated chemical signatures. Viet Cong tactical doctrine explicitly incorporated olfactory detection into operational planning. Documents recovered from captured base areas included instructions on positioning observation posts downwind of likely American approach routes. Intelligence summaries translated by U.S. forces contained specific references to detecting American units by smell. One document recovered in Phuoc Tuy Province in December 1966 stated, American units can be detected by foreign smells, including tobacco smoke, soap, and sweet scents. Position scouts to take advantage of wind direction. Detection by smell provides 10 to 30 minutes warning time for preparation of ambush positions or withdrawal if enemy force is too strong. Prisoner interrogations corroborated documentary evidence. A captured Viet Cong company commander, interrogated in January 1967, described systematic use of olfactory detection. We always positioned scouts downwind when we knew Americans were in the area. They could smell cigarettes and soap very far away. This gave us time to prepare or hide. Americans were easy to detect this way. We could tell different American units by how much they smelled. Some units smelled very strong, others less. The tactical impact was significant. Analysis of engagement patterns in Phuoc Tuy Province during 1966 showed that Viet Cong forces initiated contact in 73% of engagements with American units. This asymmetry indicated effective early warning systems, allowing VC forces to choose engagement timing and location. In contrast, Australian SAS operations in the same province during the same period showed only 38% of contacts initiated by VC forces, suggesting Australian forces achieved better operational surprise. Statistical analysis of casualty rates reinforced this pattern. American infantry battalions operating in Phuoc Tuy Province during 1966 suffered an average of 8.3 casualties per contact. Australian battalions suffered 4.7 casualties per contact. While multiple factors contributed to this disparity, including differences in unit size and tactical doctrine, post-operation analysis identified early warning as a significant factor. American units were more frequently caught in prepared ambush positions, while Australian units more frequently initiated contact on their own terms. Australian SAS smell discipline protocols were comprehensive and strictly enforced. Standing orders for patrol operations prohibited all scented personal hygiene products. Soldiers were issued unscented military soap consisting of sodium hydroxide and tallow without fragrances or additives. Usage was restricted to every 3 to 4 days. Washing was conducted with cold water only. As hot water increased chemical absorption into skin, teeth were cleaned using water and fingers. Commercial toothpaste was prohibited due to mint scent detectability. Shaving was prohibited during field operations. This served multiple purposes beyond eliminating aftershave. Facial hair provided a physical barrier reducing direct skin scent emission. Additionally, the psychological effect of growing beards reinforced the operational mindset shift from garrison standards to field necessities. Soldiers who maintained beards mentally committed to the full protocol rather than partial compliance. Uniform and equipment preparation involved extended environmental exposure termed curing. New uniforms were never worn directly into field operations. They were first exposed to jungle conditions for 2 to 4 weeks, either by hanging in jungle areas near base camps or by being worn during training exercises. This process allowed fabric to absorb environmental scents, including vegetation oils, soil compounds, and atmospheric moisture, while factory chemicals volatilized away. The result was clothing that smelled like the jungle environment, rather than like manufactured textiles. Washing uniforms was deliberately minimized. Standard practice was to wear field uniforms continuously for 2 to 3 weeks without washing. This violated every Western hygiene instinct but served crucial tactical purposes. Unwashed uniforms absorbed environmental scents continuously, creating olfactory camouflage. The natural human body odor that developed was less detectable than synthetic fragrance compounds because it matched the organic scent baseline of jungle environments. Smoking discipline was absolute. No tobacco use was permitted for 48 hours before patrol operations. No tobacco products were carried during operations. This rule was particularly difficult for soldiers with nicotine dependence, but compliance was enforced at the unit level. Violations could compromise entire operations and endanger all patrol members. The cultural shift required to enforce this took time, but became ingrained through repeated operational success. Food discipline extended the protocol. C rations, the standard American combat ration, contained processed foods with strong distinct scents. Australian SAS preferred local food sources when possible, including rice and dried fish purchased from local markets. These foods matched the regional scent baseline. When Western rations were necessary, they were eaten cold. Heating food intensified scent emissions exponentially. A heated can of C-ration ham and eggs could be detected at 300 meters. The same food eaten cold reduced detection range to 50 meters or less. The physiological cost of these protocols was real and measurable. Medical records from Australian units showed increased rates of skin infections, particularly fungal infections in tropical climates, without regular washing with antibacterial soap. Dental health declined without proper toothpaste use, though the effects were minor over typical tour lengths of 12 months. Body odor became socially uncomfortable, though soldiers adapted psychologically. The key metric was not comfort, but effectiveness. Soldiers accepted personal discomfort in exchange for improved survivability. Training for smell discipline began during SAS selection and continued throughout pre-deployment preparation. Candidates learned olfactory awareness through exercises designed to heighten scent sensitivity. They practiced identifying different scents in jungle environments, learning to distinguish natural baseline smells from foreign intrusions. They learned to use wind direction tactically, positioning themselves downwind of areas under observation. They learned to detect their own scent signatures and minimize them. Advanced training included scent tracking exercises, where instructors left scent trails using various substances, and trainees practiced detection and identification. These exercises developed olfactory capabilities beyond typical Western baselines. While Australian soldiers never achieved the olfactory sensitivity of Viet Cong fighters with lifetime jungle experience, they significantly improved from their urban-conditioned baseline. This improved detection capability served both offensive and defensive purposes, detecting enemy positions by smell and recognizing when friendly forces were emitting detectable scents. American forces initially encountered Australian smell discipline with skepticism. The concept contradicted institutional doctrine and cultural assumptions about military professionalism. Early interactions between American and Australian units sometimes produced friction over appearance standards. American commanders criticized Australian soldiers for appearing unmilitary, with beards and unwashed uniforms. Australian advisors attempting to explain smell discipline rationale faced institutional resistance. The turning point came through operational results rather than theoretical arguments. American units operating in conjunction with Australian forces observed measurably different outcomes. Patrols led by Australian advisors achieved closer approaches to enemy positions. Combined operations showed lower casualty rates. The empirical evidence gradually overcame doctrinal resistance. Several American units independently discovered smell discipline principles through operational experience. Long-range reconnaissance patrol units, operating in small teams for extended periods in contested areas, noticed that patrols running low on hygiene supplies achieved better results than well-supplied patrols. This counterintuitive observation led some LRRP teams to deliberately minimize use of scented products. The practice spread informally through the LRRP community based on shared operational experience. MAC v. SOG, the Joint Unconventional Warfare Task Force running classified operations in Laos and Cambodia, adopted smell discipline more systematically. SOG teams operated in environments where detection meant almost certain death, creating strong incentive for any tactical advantage. SOG operational guidance issued in mid-1966 explicitly prohibited scented personal hygiene products and recommended minimal washing. Teams operating under these protocols reported improved survivability. Some conventional infantry units attempted implementation with command support. Captain Jack Henderson of C Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, implemented smell discipline for his company in December 1966, after Australian advisors demonstrated the tactical advantage. Henderson's company operated in Puoc Tui Province alongside Australian forces. Over the subsequent 3 months, the company set 4 successful ambushes compared to 0 in the previous 3 months. Casualty rates dropped from 9.1 per contact to 5.3 per contact. Henderson attributed the improvement primarily to smell discipline adoption, though other tactical changes were also implemented. However, widespread adoption across American forces in Vietnam never occurred. Multiple factors prevented institutional acceptance. Logistical inertia was significant. Supply contracts for toiletries were established through multi-year procurement processes. Changing them required bureaucratic action at levels far above field commanders. The post-exchange system operated partly on commercial sales, with toiletries representing significant revenue. Reducing PX toiletry sales created institutional resistance from non-combat support elements. Cultural factors were equally important. Senior American commanders, particularly at division and corps levels, maintained strong commitment to appearance standards as expressions of military professionalism. The generational cohort of officers commanding in Vietnam had risen through ranks in World War II and Korea, where garrison standards prevailed. They viewed maintenance of those standards as fundamental to military discipline. The concept of deliberately abandoning hygiene standards violated their understanding of what made an effective military organization. Public perception concerns also influenced policy. The American media maintained significant presence in Vietnam. Photographs and film footage of American soldiers regularly appeared in newspapers and television broadcasts. Images of bearded, unwashed soldiers would contradict carefully maintained narratives about professional military operations. Public affairs considerations thus reinforced institutional resistance to smell discipline adoption. Medical establishment opposition added another barrier. Army medical doctrine emphasized hygiene as disease prevention. Medical officers argued that reducing washing frequency and eliminating antibacterial soaps would increase disease rates, particularly skin infections and gastrointestinal diseases. While these concerns had merit in garrison environments, they were less applicable to field operations where exposure to pathogens occurred regardless of hygiene practices. However, medical doctrine reinforced institutional resistance to protocol changes. The result was a bifurcated approach. Special operations forces and select conventional units adopted smell discipline based on operational necessity and commander discretion. The majority of American combat forces continued standard hygiene practices. This created a tactical disparity where some American units operated with olfactory discipline comparable to Australian standards, while most remained detectably American in their scent signatures. The strategic implications extended beyond individual unit effectiveness. Viet Cong intelligence assessment of American forces incorporated observations about unit-level practices. Some American units were identified as more dangerous based on operational patterns, including reduced detectability. This intelligence affected enemy tactical decision-making regarding when and where to engage. Units using smell discipline faced fewer ambushes, because Viet Cong commanders were less confident about detecting them early enough to prepare effective ambush positions. Conversely, American units maintaining standard hygiene practices remained predictably detectable, making them preferred targets for Viet Cong ambush operations. This dynamic created a feedback loop where units suffering high ambush casualties continued practices that contributed to those casualties, while units adopting smell discipline improved their tactical position in ways that reduced their vulnerability to the most common cause of American casualties, prepared ambushes. Statistical analysis of the entire American experience in Vietnam shows patterns consistent with this dynamic. Units with lower casualty rates and higher ambush success rates were disproportionately special operations forces, and select conventional units known to have adopted Australian-influenced tactics, including smell discipline. Units with higher casualty rates and lower engagement success rates were predominantly conventional forces, maintaining standard doctrinal approaches, including hygiene practices. The Battle of Long Tan in August 1966 illustrated the broader tactical differences between Australian and American approaches. D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment numbering 108 soldiers engaged a Viet Cong force estimated at 2,000 to 2,500 in a rubber plantation near Australian base at Nui Dat. The Australian company, caught in the open during a reconnaissance patrol, fought a defensive action for 3.5 hours before relief arrived. Australian casualties were 18 killed and 24 wounded. Viet Cong casualties were estimated at 245 confirmed dead, with total casualties possibly exceeding 600. The tactical factors contributing to this outcome were multiple, but Australian operational methods played significant roles. D Company had been conducting reconnaissance using tactics emphasizing stealth and reduced detectability. They had achieved patrol positions without enemy detection until the actual contact occurred. This suggested their approach methods, including smell discipline, allowed them to operate in a contested area without alerting enemy forces to their presence until physical contact. In contrast, American operations in similar circumstances often resulted in enemy forces detecting American presence earlier and either withdrawing or preparing ambush positions. The ability to achieve tactical surprise, even when outnumbered 20-1, provided crucial advantages in the initial engagement phase. While Long Tan primarily demonstrated Australian fire discipline and small unit tactics, the preconditions for that engagement reflected broader operational approaches, including measures to minimize detectability. Post-war analysis by American military institutions acknowledged these tactical disparities. The U.S. Army after Vietnam conducted extensive studies on counterinsurgency effectiveness. Multiple studies identified early warning and initiative in engagement as critical factors. Some studies specifically noted that Australian forces achieved higher rates of engagement initiative and recommended adoption of Australian tactics. However, these studies often focused on fire and maneuver tactics, while giving less attention to enabling factors like smell discipline that contributed to achieving tactical surprise. The incorporation of smell discipline into American doctrine occurred gradually in the 1970s and 80s. As Vietnam veterans moved into training and doctrine development positions, they brought operational lessons including smell discipline. The U.S. Army Ranger School incorporated smell discipline training into its curriculum by the early 1980s. Special Forces qualification courses added similar training. By the 1990s, smell discipline was standard doctrine for American Special Operations Forces. Field Manual 3-05.211, the Ranger Handbook, currently includes explicit guidance on scent discipline. Minimize use of scented products. Avoid aftershave, scented deodorant, scented soap, and strongly scented toothpaste. These products can be detected at considerable distances by adversaries with acute olfactory senses or training in scent detection. When operating in wilderness or rural environments, use unscented products sparingly. Allow uniforms and equipment to adopt environmental scents rather than maintaining strong artificial scents. Modern American Special Operations Forces implement smell discipline as standard practice during relevant operations. Navy SEAL teams, Army Special Forces, Marine Special Operations, and Delta Force all train in and employ scent discipline during operations in environments where olfactory detection is a concern. The practice is considered as fundamental as noise discipline and light discipline, forming part of the comprehensive approach to operational security. The scientific understanding of olfactory detection has advanced significantly since Vietnam. Modern research on human olfaction has confirmed and quantified capabilities that were empirically understood during the war. Studies on hunter-gatherer populations have demonstrated that humans without constant synthetic scent exposure maintain olfactory sensitivity comparable to many mammalian species. Research on volatile organic compound dispersion in various climates has provided precise models for scent detection ranges under different conditions. Military applications of this research extend beyond individual soldier practices. Chemical detection technologies have advanced to include artificial olfactory sensors capable of detecting and identifying specific compounds at parts per billion concentrations. These technologies are employed for explosive and chemical weapon detection, but have potential applications in personnel detection. The principle remains the same whether detection is by human nose or electronic sensor. Foreign chemical signatures in natural environments are detectable at significant ranges. Conversely, technology has also provided new methods for scent suppression. Modern military uniforms can be treated with compounds that absorb and neutralize volatile organic compounds. Specialized clothing exists that actively filters human scent emissions. These technologies provide smell discipline through equipment rather than practice changes, though complete effectiveness requires both. The broader lesson from Vietnam's smell discipline experience extends beyond olfactory considerations. It represents a case study in military adaptation and institutional learning. Australian forces entered Vietnam with doctrines developed through 20 years of jungle warfare experience. American forces entered with doctrines developed for conventional warfare. The tactical environment favored Australian approaches, but institutional factors prevented widespread American adoption, despite clear evidence of effectiveness. This pattern repeated across multiple tactical domains in Vietnam. Australian fire discipline, emphasizing ammunition conservation and accuracy over volume, proved more effective than American fire doctrine emphasizing suppressive volume. Australian patrolling techniques, emphasizing stealth and observation over aggressive sweeps, achieved better intelligence results. Australian base security, using smaller, more dispersed positions, proved less vulnerable than American large fire bases. In each case, Australian methods reflected jungle warfare experience, while American methods reflected conventional warfare doctrine. The resistance to adopting proven Allied practices reflected institutional characteristics common to large military organizations. Doctrine represents accumulated institutional knowledge, but it also represents institutional inertia. Changing doctrine requires overcoming bureaucratic resistance, retraining personnel, modifying equipment and logistics, and shifting organizational culture. These barriers exist regardless of tactical evidence supporting change. The result is that military organizations often continue ineffective practices long after better alternatives are demonstrated. The cost of this institutional inertia in Vietnam was measured in casualties. American forces suffered approximately 58,000 combat deaths during the war. Australian forces suffered approximately 500 combat deaths. Adjusting for force size differences, American casualty rates were approximately 3 times higher than Australian rates. Multiple factors contributed to this disparity, but tactical effectiveness was certainly among them. American units that adopted Australian tactics, including smell discipline, showed casualty reductions of 30 to 50% compared to units maintaining standard doctrine. Extrapolating conservatively, If smell discipline and related Australian tactical practices had been adopted across American forces in Vietnam, casualty reductions of 20 to 30% might have been achievable. This would represent 10,000 to 15,000 fewer American combat deaths. The magnitude of this potential impact makes the failure to adopt proven practices one of the significant tactical failures of the American experience in Vietnam. The individual human cost appears in the stories of soldiers who learned too late or never learned at all. Medical records from field hospitals show numerous casualties from ambushes, where the initial indication of enemy presence was sudden fire from prepared positions. After-action reports describe patrols surprised by enemy forces despite maintaining proper noise and light discipline. The missing element in these accounts was often olfactory discipline. Enemy forces detected American patrols by smell, prepared ambush positions, and initiated contact with devastating effect. Conversely, accounts from American soldiers who adopted smell discipline describe improved operational outcomes. Long-range reconnaissance patrol veterans report achieving observation positions within meters of enemy camps. Special operations veterans describe walking past enemy positions without detection. Infantry veterans from units that adopted the practice report surviving ambushes because enemy forces failed to detect them in time to prepare effective positions. These accounts demonstrate the tactical value of what seems like a minor practice change. The post-Vietnam career of smell discipline in American military practice validates its effectiveness. 4 decades after Vietnam, smell discipline remains standard doctrine for American Special Operations Forces. It has proven effective in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other operational environments. The practice developed by British forces in Malaya, refined by Australian forces in Vietnam, and eventually adopted by American forces has become permanent military knowledge. Modern military training explicitly teaches this lesson to new soldiers. The price paid to learn it in Vietnam ensured the lesson would not be forgotten. Institutional memory, often criticized for its rigidity, in this case performed its essential function, preserving hard-won knowledge for future generations. The thousands of American casualties in Vietnam, who might have been avoided, had smell discipline been adopted earlier, at least contributed to institutional learning that protects current and future soldiers. The strategic lesson is broader than tactics. It concerns the capacity of military institutions to learn from allies, adapt to unfamiliar operational environments, and overcome doctrinal rigidity when evidence demands change. These institutional capabilities determine military effectiveness across all domains. Vietnam tested American military adaptability and found it wanting in many respects. The slow adoption of smell discipline was one specific manifestation of this broader adaptability failure. Other militaries studying the Vietnam experience drew their own conclusions. The British military, already practicing smell discipline through its own Vietnam experience, reinforced these doctrines. Commonwealth militaries, including Canadian, New Zealand, and Singaporean forces, incorporated smell discipline into their training. Even non-Western militaries analyzed Vietnam lessons. The Chinese People's Liberation Army studied both American and Australian tactics, explicitly noting the effectiveness of Australian smell discipline in its analysis of jungle warfare doctrine. The scientific study of olfactory detection in military contexts has expanded significantly since Vietnam. Research programs have investigated scent signatures of military equipment, vehicles, and personnel. Studies have quantified detection ranges for various compounds under different environmental conditions. This research has produced comprehensive understanding of olfactory factors in military operations, all building on the empirical foundation established during the Malayan Emergency and Vietnam War. Commercial applications have emerged from this military research. Hunting product manufacturers market scent suppression clothing and compounds to hunters, seeking to avoid detection by game animals. The principles are identical to military smell discipline. Minimize foreign scent signatures to avoid detection by organisms with superior olfactory senses in their native environment. The fact that commercial hunting products now incorporate these principles demonstrates how widely the underlying science is understood and accepted. Yet the core lesson remains what Australian Warrant Officer Pete Davidson told American Staff Sergeant Danny Morrison in September 1966. You smell like America, and that will get you killed in a jungle where America doesn't belong. The bluntness of that statement cut through doctrinal complexity to tactical reality. Foreign smells are detectable. Detection enables ambush. Ambush causes casualties. Therefore, minimize foreign smells. The logic is simple. The implementation requires overcoming institutional inertia and cultural assumptions, but the logic remains inescapable. Morrison survived Vietnam, returned home, and spent years teaching other soldiers what he learned. His insistence that smell discipline saved his life influenced training programs and operational practices. Davidson completed 3 tours, trained hundreds of American soldiers, and contributed to the transfer of Australian tactical knowledge to American forces. The relationship between these two soldiers, Australian and American, represented the broader alliance relationship where Allied expertise transferred gradually through personal relationships and shared operational experience. The tragedy is that this transfer occurred too slowly to benefit most American soldiers serving in Vietnam. The expertise existed from 1957 when Australian SAS formed, incorporating British lessons from Malaya. It was available to American forces from 1965, when Australian combat forces deployed to Vietnam. Yet systematic adoption did not occur. Individual soldiers learned from individual Australian advisors. Some units adopted the practices, but institutional doctrine never changed during the war. Smell discipline became American doctrine only after the war ended and could no longer save American lives in Vietnam. This pattern of delayed institutional learning characterizes much of the American Vietnam experience. Lessons were learned, but learned slowly, often too slowly to affect outcomes. By the time doctrine incorporated hard-won knowledge, the war was over. The soldiers who paid the price for institutional learning could not benefit from the knowledge they helped generate. Later soldiers benefited. Current soldiers benefit. But the cost was paid by those who served when institutions had not yet learned. The memorial wall in Washington bearing 58,000 names represents those costs. Among those names are soldiers who died in ambushes they might have survived, who were detected when they might have remained hidden, who smelled like America in a jungle where that smell was lethal. We cannot know which specific casualties might have been prevented by smell discipline. We can only know that the practice reduced casualties for units that adopted it, and that most American units never adopted it. The obligation of those who study military history is to ensure these lessons remain learned. Institutional memory requires maintenance. Doctrine must be taught to each new generation. The tactical practices that proved effective must be preserved and transmitted. Smell discipline is a minor tactical detail in the vast complexity of military operations, but it represents the broader principle that operational effectiveness requires adapting to environmental reality, rather than imposing institutional preferences regardless of consequences. Modern American military forces have learned this lesson. They adapt to operational environments. They learn from allies. They modify practices based on tactical evidence. They overcome institutional resistance when necessary. These capabilities were developed partly through painful Vietnam experience, where institutional rigidity cost lives. The lesson was learned. The cost was high. The obligation remains to ensure the cost was not paid in vain. If you found this tactical analysis revealing, leave a like. Subscribe for more military history analysis, examining how small tactical details determined survival. Comment below with your perspective on institutional military learning. If this tactical analysis taught you something new, hit that like button. Not subscribed? Subscribe now for more military history deep dives. Drop a comment below. Should institutional doctrine adapt faster to battlefield reality? Let's discuss.